joining us. Do you think we need to review Zoom procedures, Mike? I don't think anyone's going to be.
No, but for Gabe's benefit, I've turned off the unmute yourself, so you're able to unmute yourself whenever you want to. So, or at least you should be able to. If you can't use your raise hand function, I'll make sure. There you go.
Okay. I think you guys can hear me.
All right. Yep. So we're all set. Unless if somebody else jumps online, then I might have to lock it down, but for now, we'll keep it open.
Awesome. All right. Does anyone want to move approval of the agenda?
I will.
I'll second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay, great. Comments from the chair. I think my only comment is that I realized I can't make either of the meetings in August. But I think if we're just reviewing, if those meetings are reviewing the zoning, I don't think they, will be chair heavy, kind of managed meetings. So I think that's going to be easy enough. But I guess it's worth asking if a lot of people are going to be gone for some of those meetings. If any of them should be canceled.
I will be around for both of those.
Okay.
The 11th and the 25th, right?
Yeah, that sounds.
I'll be out of town for the second, the 20th.
The 25th. Okay.
I'll be around for both.
Okay. Sean and Gabe, are you guys here for the 11th and the 25th in August?
And I'm certainly here for the second week. That last week, I'm not sure.
Okay.
I should be here for both, I think.
Okay. All right. Well, it sounds like for sure it's worth having the meeting on the 11th. And then you guys can decide if the 25th is. So those are my, oh yeah. And then, just in terms of what I shared last time about terming off the commission, I guess we can just do that at the beginning of September, the first meeting in September, maybe elect a new chair. Does that make sense to folks or?
Sure.
Yeah. And maybe I'll just try, if it's helpful, to just email people individually and ask them. And so then I have a sense when we're at that meeting who's willing to do what. So I'm happy to do that. Okay. All right. General business. I don't think we have any members of the public.
No.
Attendance. Okay. So Mike, update on planning projects in the city.
All right. So, as you guys know, did send out the notice that we did get the plan of the year. So
yay, congratulations.
So that was a nice surprise in that one. The regional approval of the city plan will be upcoming on Thursday, August 21st. It'll be at 6:30. So if you want to put that on your calendar, you can.
What's the date of that? I'm sorry.
August 21st. Should be a Thursday. And I'll send out the more detailed information when we get it. There's usually a Zoom link and there's going to be an in-person, but I don't know. I assume it's going to be at their facility, which is above the old Walgreens. So some other updates. Country Club Road, we're still working on an infrastructure contract. So that is we set aside money, $100,000 to do the design work for extending utilities from the roundabout up to Country Club Road to basically prepare the site for development. So phase one is to get that work done. And so we have a contract, they're working on it, they're at 60%. And we're gonna be setting up a meeting to go to city council to approve what would be the final details that they need to know. Are we going to lower the grade of the road? How wide will the sidewalk be going up the country club? Because we're gonna build a sidewalk. Yeah. Well, there's already, this will go from the utilities up from the roundabout to the Country Club Road, then turning and going up the hill. So some of the questions for council to decide is going up the hill, what do we have for infrastructure? Do we want to lower the grade of the road? It currently varies between 10 and 14%. We're going to even it out to 12, but we could lower it to 10 if we wanted to. It's just a matter of money. The question is, does council want to go and pursue that or not? We just need,
Then like have to loop around. You have to get up the top somehow. So it just,
no, this is
Like-
just to get up to the building itself.
that's what I mean.
Yeah.
But it would have to take a different route if we were dropping it. Because you said right now it's between 10 and 14.
Yeah, it would lower and you'd have cut fills on the side. So, but it is possible to do it. Now, the question for council will be, is that what we want to do? I think our opinion is that evening it out to a 12% grade is fine. And then we'd be elevating Route 2 at the same time. So,
And then the CDBG DR application, that's something the city will decide to submit or not?
we're going to be
Okay.
working on submitting a grant. So that's the Community Development Block Grant Disaster Recovery. So a certain amount of money has been set aside based on a percentage from the disaster. And so there's a certain amount of money that's been set aside, and we'll be applying for money to pay for that infrastructure upgrade, because that money can be used for infrastructure that is intended to create resilient housing or a resilient neighborhood. And that's what this would do. So that makes that our project eligible for the funding. So that's what we intend to apply for, but we can apply for multiple applications. So city council will be working with city council to decide which applications we want to pursue and which ones, and we'll look at a priority. I need to get a CDBG application specialist to help out in writing that application. So there are various people that do it, and we've got folks in the area that do it. And I've got a list of people. I just have to go and put together an RFP and get that out so we can try to get somebody on board to start answering all the detailed questions on that. And the last update for anyone, I know some of you watched the council meetings. I've been working with council about making a couple of decision points along the way regarding the growth center and Tier 1A and this question of TIF and CHIP. So they're all kind of related. They all relate to Country Club Road and that development project. So they kind of relate. We'd been looking at doing a growth center application because that's a requirement for us to be able to do TIF, tax increment financing, to pay for the infrastructure at the site. And TIF would allow us to bring infrastructure across to Sabins Pasture so we could connect the road systems through. So that's the TIF question. But we now understand that if we qualify for Tier 1A, and it's very likely we would, that's also a qualifier, which would mean we wouldn't have to do the growth center application. We just have to get our Tier 1A approved, and that would get us our second checkbox. You need to have 2 boxes checked in order to be eligible to apply for TIF. And then the second question is, do we want to do TIF at all? And that's the other thing we're working with city council on, because there's a new proposal that just went through at the state level called CHIP. I'm glad they used a different name because it makes it easier to explain, but CHIP and TIF are really the same thing. Just CHIP is a single property. So it's a parcel tax increment financing as opposed to a district. So we could apply just for Country Club Road for a CHIP, but that might make it challenging for us to connect the roads through. So that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to get answers. What can we use money for? What can we not use money for? So that way we have all the information for city council to make a decision of growth center, yes or no, TIF or CHIP. And the consequences of that whole conversation is, it's not just academic. It makes a difference in how we move the project forward. We've always talked about having Country Club Road, we're going to get all the pieces put together. Our Act 250 exemptions, our tax increment financing, and then we're going to put it out there because then we're offering a lot to developers and we'll get a lot of people who are interested. CHIP, we need to have the developer early. So if we decide to do CHIP, then we kind of got to turn things on their head and say, we've got to get our developer on board soon, not like right away, but we should be looking this fall about putting out an RFP to get a developer and decide on what project we want to do. Because if we do CHIP, we'll need the developer to put together a project to submit in partnership with the city, but they're going to be the ones who put together the project to say, this is what we need the tax increment financing for. So again, I don't have all the answers. I've got a lot of questions from council, but that's what we're working on and having those conversations for. So those are a couple of the updates of the bigger projects that are going on right now with the city.
Hey, Mike, real quick, if I don't know if you explained this, maybe I missed it, but you said when you were talking about the growth center versus tier one, A1, that's right, you said there needs to be 2 boxes that you need to be checked in order to get the financing. I'm assuming we've already checked off.
Yeah, we've already checked one box.
Which one is that?
I can't remember the exact
Okay.
which one what exactly was in that first box, but there's a requirement that you need to have certain things. And then the second one is like an either or. Either you need to have a growth center or you need to be a low income depressed area, which we don't qualify for. So if we were Berry City, we could just check the first box and check the second box and we meet the requirements to put in an application. So we've always had that harder step of doing the growth center, which we have. We have a growth center right now. It just doesn't include Country Club Road.
What are the pros and cons of TIF versus CHIP? I mean, it sounds like CHIP is like shoving a square peg into a round hole, because this isn't, it doesn't seem like it follows the theme of the law for single parcels. So what is?
It's, well, if that would be the thing, is it would probably limit us to just working on, we would have to do a CHIP for our property, and then Alan Goldman and Doug Zorsey would have to do a CHIP for their project. But we're still, as we said, we're still talking to the state about, you know, what does this mean for these? Because usually TIFs are big. Usually TIFs are, you know, when we did ours, it extended from, because we've had a TIF a few years ago, and it went all the way from like Bailey Ave or out near that, because it included Capitol Plaza, all the way out to the other end of Sabins Pasture, was all in the TIF district. It was, you know, included hundreds of parcels. We just need 4 parcels. So it would be a really small TIF district or really big CHIP because it's got more than 1 parcel. We think, and again, we don't want to hedge our bets on, we think, we really want to hear from the state in writing that this is the case, that we can have more than 1 parcel in a CHIP district. But we need to know that as a fact before we abandon TIF.
What is the benefit of using CHIP instead of TIF?
The application is a lot easier.
How is it?
Yeah, it's going to be much easier. Our anticipation to apply for TIF is we were going to be hiring White and Burke to put together the application. It was going to cost $110,000 for them to put together the application for us. So it's a very expensive application process. They're really good at getting the applications. They always get them through, but at the same time, it's a much more complicated application than a CHIP. Again, from our understanding, because that was the intent, was that this was supposed to be a much simpler, much more straightforward process, but they're still writing the rules. So, you know, the proof will be in the pudding on that one. So that's, those are the types of, it is really up to the pros and cons. You know, what are the advantages and disadvantages, and council make a decision, because when they make the decision, then we know what's going on with staff work and these other timing.
On the infrastructure contract, is that just to get utilities up to the location, and then, like, I'm imagining kind of like a thoroughfare and then spiders out into the individual lots eventually. Is this contract just to get things to a centralized location on top of the hill, and then a future contract will serve
Yes.
the roads and.
Yes, this gets it up to basically up to the existing building that's there, maybe a little bit past the existing building along the existing roadway. Because that was one of the things we needed to find out was, where are we going to have this road go? If the road adjusts, then we need to adjust our contract with them. But the decision is the road's going to pretty much stay where it is all the way up past. Then from there, who knows? Maybe it's a T intersection, maybe it's loops out farther, maybe it pulls in tight. But at that point, the infrastructure is at the site and the developers can come up with the proposals. All the developers have an opportunity to come up with proposals that said, this is where we would put the road, this is where we would put the buildings.
Is Complete Streets or the Transportation Committee involved in that discussion?
They're going to have to be when it comes to the proposals for what's going to happen up there.
I
But
see that it's kind of like a difficult location in terms of walking, biking to reach.
yeah, and that's
I've often-
the proposals is the existing contract that they're working on is going to have a sidewalk. It's going to have either a shared use path or a wide sidewalk that goes up Country Club Road. The idea is going down, it'll probably have there'll be a bike lane that goes up. So if somebody wants to,
It's a difficult road.
if somebody has an e-bike and wants to go and do it, they've got a lane they could get over into the for the uphill. Downhill, they wouldn't need a lane. But for younger people, kids, whoever, the sidewalk would be sufficient to either walk your bikes down. We don't think it'd be intended for anyone to actually ride a bike down that shared use path, because that would be 12% grade would be rocketing down the hill into the intersection. So we probably put signage at the top that would say, stop here and dismount the bike and walk down to the bottom of the hill. Or if you want to ride it, great, get into the road. If you're a good rider and you want to be in the road, you can ride down to the bottom in the road itself. But
It'd be interesting to see what professionals come up with in terms of accessibility like that,
yeah,
we just see a road, but I'm sure there's all sorts of permutations that can happen.
yeah. And the site's going to have other access back to the bike path. There is a path through the woods. So that's at a much lower grade, a much easier grade that would drop you onto the existing bike path a little bit after where you do the crossover.
Right.
And then you start heading towards, there's a section where it kind of, there used to be.
You can see it and you're like, I just need to get
Yeah.
there. But I have to go
Yeah, I mean, the bike path is on Old Country Club Road, and Old Country Club Road used to go up to the country club. And so there is, if you looked far enough back in the past, there was a road that went up through there that was abandoned and overgrown. So you can, as you're looking there, you can see where there used to be a road.
Right.
So we would it can't be a road again just because with the wetlands and everything else, it just wouldn't.
Right.
But we could certainly put another path back in, and that's what we would explore when we get to that stage. Pretty good.
Yeah. Okay, let's move on to discussion of part one.
Permanent zoning. All right, so let me go through this relatively quick. We do have some paper copies, and I know you guys online won't have the paper copies, but I'm just going to go through part one, and then we can start talking about what things we want to try to look at, or if you've got questions, jump right in. So part one of the zoning is really the legal framework. It kind of lays everything out for everybody. There is these little information bullets. I've been pulling them out as I get the opportunities to, not because I don't want to inform people, but because they legally are problematic. For example, there are times it talks about different things like a definition of something and the definition's not right, or other things such as those. So I like to remove those just because we really shouldn't have them technically in here. So section 1001 is authority and enactment. So we're a Dillon's rule state. Little legal history. So states are either Dillon's rule or home rule. And Dillon's rule means you can only do what the state says you can do. Home rule says you can do whatever you want as a municipality unless the state says you can't. So those are the two sides of the coin. Either you can do everything you want except when they say you can't, or you can only do what they say you can't. We are a Dillon's rule state. So we need to actually go in anytime we're adopting regulations and go through where did we get the authority to adopt zoning? And that's what this is talking about. This is where we get the authority. That's why that's there. Purpose is pretty straightforward. Construction of the regulations. What that's getting at, and again, a lot of these are necessary in the event of an appeal. And what this is looking at is just saying, if there's another rule in Montpelier, another thing in the state, another whatever, if our rules are stricter than somebody else's rules, our rules apply. And vice versa. So if the state, we regulate vernal pools, and we have these standards that have a 500-foot protection area. The state does not. But because we do, those are in effect. Because because of the construction of the regulations, our rules will overrule theirs, and vice versa. Theirs will overrule ours. And that's really in effect, whether we say that statement or not, but it's just sometimes helpful to have it in there. And the next one is one of the bigger ones, and this will go in with chapter 110, which are the exemptions. So applicability is what needs a permit. This is your most basic thing. This is also why we have a separate river hazard regulation than we do zoning, because the applicability is different. And a lot of communities mash them together to try to make them work, but they don't work very well. So that's why we split them into two. But really, there are a couple of ways of looking at applicability. What needs a permit? So at its most basic, what is it that has to go through and get a permit and what does not? Because that's fundamentally how we're going to administer this. And we're going to try to get all the answers to the questions of things by how we word this. So, and there are two ways of doing this. Almost all communities do it the way we do it. So you can have a statement that is very broad and says everything needs to have a permit. Then go through and say, accept this and accept this, accept this, accept this, accept this. The other thing you can do is be very specific and say, these 10 things need to have a permit. And if it's not on the list, it doesn't need a permit. So most communities will make very broad statements, and 1004 is that really broad statement, knowing that we're going to have a section on exemptions, and a very big section on exemptions, because all development in the city of Montpelier requires a zoning permit. That's the applicability. So all development. What is development? It's the construction, reconstruction, conversion, structural alteration, relocation, enlargement, or demolition of any building or other structure or part thereof. So anything. That's dog houses, bird houses, right up to 5-story buildings. So we're going to say everything needs a permit, knowing at some point we're going to say what doesn't. Earthwork, paving of unpaved surfaces, that actually was added in because we had an application come in where there was just a gravel path, and they wanted to pave the gravel path. And so as administrators were like, does that even trigger a zoning permit? It was kind of a gray area. And we didn't care. It could be either way. We just needed to know as an administrator, do we require them to get a permit for that? In this case, we talked to Planning Commission at the time, and we said, yes, paving of an unpaved surface would need a permit. Removal or disturbance of vegetation. So this kind of came in once we put in buffer requirements. Like, well, it's great to have buffer requirements, but then anyone can go in and cut down the buffers because removing vegetation does not require a zoning permit. So we had to add that in to go and say, well, yes, it does require a permit. Otherwise, you could cut down your buffers that are required. So removal of disturbance of vegetation in certain situations, changes of use, subdivision of a parcel, which includes any of these. So we always have this question that comes up for subdivisions. Is a boundary line adjustment to subdivision, does it need a permit? In this case, we said yes. A boundary line adjustment is a subdivision and therefore needs to get a permit. So this is the really big thing. Everything needs a permit. And like I said, in about 2 minutes, we'll get to all the exemptions that we put in there. And that's where I think there are opportunities for us to have a conversation of what other ones do we need? Do we need to clarify or expand them? So conflicts with other laws, these regulations are in effect. Actually, construction of regulations was about the limitations. Conflict with other laws is about which one takes priority over the others. So the effective date, amendment or repeal, and severability. So severability is just a requirement to be in there in case somebody appeals. It's a popular thing for people to appeal. Basically, if the severability clause isn't in there, then if you can prove one piece of the zoning is not valid, then the entire document becomes invalid. And this says, if you find something's invalid, just that little piece is invalid. And the rest of it remains intact. So exemptions, and
Wait,
this is
sorry, quickly,
yes.
before we move beyond, just, I wanted to file this under very minor, but going back to section 1002, it just talks about the Montpelier master plan, and I'm sure that would probably need to be edited to.
Good catch. I skipped that one when I was reading it because I was like, just a purpose statement. Good. That will need to be updated. All right. So 110 is about exemptions. So after we have this list that says everything under the sun needs a permit, we now have two sections, 101, which 101 and 102, or is it 101A? It's 101A and 101B. So 101A are the full exemptions. So we've got two groups. One group is it's exempt everywhere, doesn't matter. B says it's exempt everywhere except for in design review. And those are because there are certain things in design review that we still want to look at. So those are the two distinctions. So under the general exemptions, normal maintenance repair of existing structures, as long as there's no change of use, involves no change in design materials or outward appearance. Emergency repairs and stabilizations of a structure damaged by a cause to the extent that necessary public health, safety, and promote the structure and to protect the structure from the elements. So there's a lot of work within the stabilizing and securing that gives us the ability as administrators to say, yeah, don't worry about it. The tree fell in your house. You don't have to wait for a permit to go and put the tarp over it and do some emergency repairs. Interior renovations, including an increase in floor area by finishing unfinished space, as long as there's no change to the exterior dimension, no change of use in the number of dwelling units. So if somebody's doing some work on the inside from a zoning standpoint, from a building standpoint, you probably need a building permit. But from a zoning standpoint, if you're doing some work on your house on the inside, you want to remodel your kitchen, go for it. You don't need a zoning permit for that.
So I feel like I have questions about all of these. Can we slow down a bit?
Sure.
Okay. So I don't know if anyone else is like, I feel like every single one, I'm just like, wait a second. Number one, I don't understand the second part of that. As long as there's no change to its use, but involves no change in design, materials, or outward appearance. I mean, I
Yeah,
feel like
that's
stuff that kind of like antiquated now because I can definitely renovate my porch without getting and put in higher grade materials without getting a permit for it.
use. I think, yeah, and I actually, when I read that one, I thought that was a little bit strange because it kind of sounded like it needed to be, that statement needed to be in the design review side.
Right.
Because if it's not in the design review side, we don't care about design.
Right.
If you're re-siding your house, you don't need a zoning permit for that.
And even,
And that will change the outside appearance. Yeah.
or I guess. So I once heard about a person who wanted to reside their house up on Cliff Street and he wanted to use vinyl siding. And that wasn't permitted at the time. But then after some changes to the historic designation of the area, he could then use it. Is that right?
I don't know the specifics of that
But it's
case,
like-
but there was,
it's
yes, he was in
replaced.
design, he or she was in design review. And that was the reason for the, you can't change that. So I think
They can now, or does it still have to go to the DRB?
it doesn't have to go to DRB, but
Okay.
there is still design review for the change of materials. If it is historic,
Yeah,
then there are certain requirements that need to be met. And I can't off the top of my head recite what they are anymore because I help write the rules, but
Well, I
I
get the
don't do it
question
on
about
every day,
the,
but
because I remember I think we did change the design review district, so did we just take that out of the design review district? I can't remember,
Yeah, no.
but I feel like maybe we did take
We
Cliff
definitely-
Street.
designation
We
smaller.
definitely pulled back. But I mean, the question, the root of your question is like, if you're in design review, that's a possibility. That, especially if you're in a historic district too, like, there's gonna be those requirements. So
But I thought they changed, because I remember I also, when we painted our house, I called the city to find out if there was.
painting
regulations.
definitely has been taken out.
So, yeah, and someone told me like, oh, no, you can paint whatever color you want
Yep.
now.
Yeah, in the
So I feel like
past,
some
there
things
were
have
there
been,
were
like,
requirements.
crossed out.
Yes, we definitely changed a couple of them. Certain things I can tell you, with 99% certainty, you can do. Replacing your windows. Windows used to be a hard thing to do. Going from clapboards to vinyl siding in design review on a historic house, I don't know the answer to that one off the top of my head. It may be, yes, you can do it. It may be yes in certain circumstances, but I don't want anyone to run out and start siding their house
Okay.
saying, Mike said so. I heard him on the planning commission.
So going back to number one here,
Mhm.
so then do you need a permit if you're changing the materials of an existing structure?
No, I'm taking your note down. I think the period should be after use.
Okay, that's what I was.
I think after everything with the and after, we had a lot of, when we were originally putting this together, we had a lot of jumbling around and gnashing of teeth and pointing fingers and to try to figure out how to get these into the right place for what should be on the design review side and what should be on this side.
And now you're bringing up a question for me, Maria, because I
Just churn.
was thinking about use and I was noting, a change of use in a structure is identified as needing a zoning permit, but
Oh, is it
just
self-
thinking in it, well, I was just thinking in a more like form-based code kind of way, like, is it really the use that we want to regulate if it doesn't impact, say, traffic, or is it the footprint?
I think they do want to regulate. That's pretty clear.
Yeah, well, I guess that's
Right?
That's it.
That's
Yes.
one of the things that
Yes,
triggers.
right. But
Yeah.
I'm just noting that as a question that I had. Right. Yes. Currently, we do want to regulate the use, but that's a question that I have
Right.
because I think that can be tricky.
Yeah,
Are there
there's,
grades of uses? I mean, like, just like a top level, like industrial use versus.
yeah, we have a
residential
use
use.
table 2-15. It has a lot of the stuff in it. So,
Okay.
and that's later in it's in part 2, which we'll get to. But yes, form-based codes has its strengths, weaknesses. There are different ways of doing it. the one we always like to go and refer to is like, okay, form-based code, but somebody puts in a lawnmower repair shop in your residential neighborhood. And you're like, well, as long as the house looks like a house, you can do whatever you want in it. And it's like, well,
I think that's
to an
the
extent,
top level
yeah.
things I was saying, there's heavy industrial is very different than residential.
Yeah.
But then there's like, I don't know, a salon, right? Which is kind of like very light industrial, so it's kind of like there are these grades.
Yeah.
And I'm sure when they're seeking their permit, this is what they're looking at. But I wonder if there is some type of, if you're only moving like 2 steps up the ladder, then it's okay. But if you're moving 5 steps up the ladder to heavy industrial, then it requires a permit.
Yeah, well, and we'll go through a lot of it. There are varying degrees of what you could do, like a salon in your house could be a home business, and that's allowed. And it may be allowed without a permit. It's technically a home business. That one probably wouldn't be, because you have customers coming in. It would probably be actually be a home business. Home
Yeah.
occupations are the ones that are exempt.
Like lawyers.
Well, if you did something where you don't have people coming in, I'm a bookkeeper. I, for a period of time, 18 years ago, 19 years ago, I had my own planning consulting business. Nobody ever came to my house. I operated my business out of my house. I didn't need a zoning permit to do that because nobody's coming to my house. There's no signs in front of my yard. Nobody really knows what's going on anyway. So those are the type of things that doesn't need a permit. We're going to do, a hair salon. Okay, you're going to need a permit. It's permitted, and we've got these set of conditions. As long as you do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, we'll give you the permit and pay us the $45 and off you go. And then in other cases, it becomes a home industry. You're like, okay, well now you're taking it to a different level. We're gonna need to have more review over, you want to have a landscaping business and you're gonna have 25 lawn mowers and trailers in your yard. It's like, okay, well now you're gonna start to impact the neighborhood. People showing up at 6:30, your employees showing up to get in the trucks and get loaded up and get going. It's making a disturbance. Those are the things where it's like, well, it's okay over there, but it's not okay over here. We need to review it. And again, those are all policy decisions that planning commission and we can have more open rules and we could have more restrictive rules. That's the democratic process. From my employee standpoint, we just want it clear.
Right.
We just want to know we have to administer this, and we don't want to have a situation where it's like, well, do it for those guys, but not those guys. It's like, well, we need to have black and white rules that say, here it is. And then we can issue permits efficiently. So yes, I think that's right. I'm not sure if this whole number 1 would get moved to point B or if we've got to come up with something different, but I'll have to. It kind of makes me think this should have been in point B, and that's where the mistake is. This really should be there.
What do you mean by point B?
Point B is where the stuff that's
1101
only,
point B.
yeah, 101, the next page when we get to it, that's things in design review need to. And
I guess I don't quite even understand why the language, I don't see what the import of change in use is. It sounds like we can just grant eternal attention to normal maintenance and repair for an existing structure. Why does it have to be continued?
true, because the change of use itself is a separate condition of
Right.
the permit. So yeah, you're
Yeah.
probably right on that.
Yeah.
Normal maintenance and repair of
I mean,
existing
it just
structures.
triggers a whole bunch of other things separate and apart from this, so
Yeah.
why have that be a condition for something that's a separate activity? It's not.
Yeah.
So I mean, I would just.
Yeah.
I don't want to beat this to death. I know we've got.
Nope, but it's a good point. Those are things we should look for. So there's a lot of good practices. This full disclosure, we had contractors. We had a contractor who worked on this with us, and so a lot of this was her model,
Mm.
and she has a lot of great things in her model. But there are things, I came into writing zoning regulations from a different background, so I always looked at it a little bit differently and I would have structured things a little differently. So some of these things like this, you really want to keep some rules are any zoning, always use the same word, just use one word. So it's not parcels and lots. It's always parcels. You know, it gets very boring writing these documents, but you always have to use the exact same word. We're not going to talk about building lots and parcels because they mean the same thing. So you always use the word parcel, but you also want to try to keep things very separate and distinct. The more you connect things with ands and ors, the more likely you are to get yourself caught up, because if it says and, then you have to meet both, and you have to meet this and this, and it's like, well,
Yeah, that's why like the conditional clauses in A1.
if they're
they don't make sense.
unnecessary,
They
if
don't-
they're unnecessary, then we should simplify them and take them out. And so Aaron makes a good point. I think that's and so yeah, if you're reviewing these and have other thoughts, we don't have to wordsmith each one of these through. Only took us 7 years to write this in the first time.
Well, then number 2, speaking of, it has that shall in there, further development beyond the minimum necessary to stabilize, and secure the structure shall require a zoning permit. But if they are just repairing it, or one up there, they're just repairing an existing structure, they don't need a zoning permit.
Correct. I think
Yeah.
the second sentence was really meant to be kind of a clarifying statement to make sure people don't, this is really looking at the minimum. If you're looking at doing more than just the minimum necessary to stabilize the structure, you need the zoning permit. It should go without saying, but sometimes it needs to be said. And
I don't, so stabilize and secure, I'm imagining like literally a 2x4 is just like holding up a roof, like it's stable and secure now. But if they just want to return it back to the way it used to look. I think stabilize and secure right here is too strict. I think it should just be beyond the minimum necessary to repair the existing structure. Shall require zoning permit. So this is making it sound like all you're allowed to do is get it stable, and then you'll need a permit beyond that.
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, that's what it
That's
that
what
is
that-
what it's
It
saying.
is what it's saying, but I don't think that is, to me, that's not the intention. If someone wants to just make it look like it used to look before the car rammed into it, I think.
Well, what it's referencing before, see sections 1206 and 3004. The 1206 is actually later in this. It's talking about damaged and destroyed structures. So, go ahead and stabilize it. And then we're going to look at this damaged and destroyed structures section to determine whether or not you need a permit. In some cases, it may be you
Okay.
don't,
So you might
because
still need.
yeah, you might still not need a permit.
So then the shall should be a may. This is saying that it shall require a zoning permit beyond stabilizing and securing.
No, the shall makes sense if what you're trying to do is just to make clear that it doesn't give a green light to development beyond the minimum necessary to stabilize and secure the structure.
The section
It's just-
1206 is the one that's going to specify whether you need a permit or not.
Sure, well, I don't know what that says, but I think the problem is if you put a may in there. I don't know, that's a good point.
Yeah, I mean, I
Yeah,
don't
it
think
could be a
anyone,
may. There could be situations where
I don't
you
know.
could go beyond.
but I mean, does anyone like read the zoning regulations and they're like, oh, okay, maybe it's gonna require zoning. Like, if somebody's gonna do that, and not consult with the city, I feel like they're probably, I don't know.
Yeah.
I think may makes sense. I agree with you.
I don't know. I mean, if somebody like rammed a car into my porch, I wouldn't think like, I just need to stabilize it. Then I'll talk to the city about what I can do. Like, I would just immediately try to get it fixed. Like,
Yeah, that's
you know
true.
what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, I just want it not to look like that anymore.
Yeah, I think technically shall it would be an overstatement. Because the repair, if it turns out it is just repair, then you would not need the zoning permit per number 1.
Yeah.
somebody drives into your porch and you need to replace it, and you're gonna put it back to the way it was, then yes, you would not need a
That's not
permit.
normal maintenance. I mean, I think we can circle the drain with all this stuff all day long, but I get
Yeah,
everybody's point.
the people that beat this up, to get to Ariane's point, the people who beat this up are the attorneys who want to go to court and say, but
Oh,
I don't, these are the legal beagles that's why we try to be as careful as we can with our zoning to make sure we leave no wrinkle or hole where somebody can get a finger in there to peel it back and say, aha, now I don't need a permit and I can do what I want.
So maybe the parenthetical then is. Like structure may require a zoning permit for sections 1206. 3004.
I mean, like we said, we did put in the second sentence just as an advisory statement. It doesn't have to be there to have legal standing. We could strike it and just leave it ending at elements, period.
But I mean, I think this is a good segue into sort of asking a broader sort of policy question that the commission has to grapple with, which is what's the function of the zoning regulations? Like, do we want it to be a permissive document that sort of gives guidance for folks that live in town to enable them to do things, or are we looking at this as a prescriptive document that limits the city's liability? I mean, I think to Mike's point, like that's really, I read it that way, which is this is pretty heavy prescriptive language that sort of gives the city arguments in defending its positions vis-a-vis this document by saying like, yeah, I mean, maybe you could have had sure, section 3004 allows for certain demolition of certain buildings under certain circumstances, but we can still use shall here so that it ensures that parties that are thinking about demolishing a building after an accident, they have to go at least reference section 3004 to see whether or not they need a zoning permit to do it. And this is, I mean, I'm one of those people that lives in this world where like shalls and mays open and close doors in very significant ways. And so, but to your point, like I don't think there's a right or wrong answer versus may versus shall.
Right.
But it does have an impact in terms of like the overall tone and what the purpose of the document ultimately serves. And I'm a glass half empty kind of guy, so I like the prescriptive language. I think it helps tighten things down, even though it becomes bulky and a little confusing. But I keep going back to Tim Heaney. Basically, I mean, seriously, like he's just like, look, this is a 200-page document. Like it doesn't need to be this. And so I think we need to find ways to streamline this stuff while still being, fairly focused on like what it is we're trying to do with the document. What are we trying to enable? What are we trying to prevent? But hopefully do it in ways where you don't have to go to 4 different places in the document to figure out whether you need a zoning permit after somebody runs a car into your building.
Right.
But I don't know if that's possible. So,
see, my concern is I feel like whenever someone has to get a permit, then now all of their neighbors get a say on what they're doing with their property. So to me, that's like,
well, not if it's an administrative permit,
But
right?
and the rules also say whether they get a say.
Yeah.
So that's part of the discussion of, how much say do we want to let neighbors have? And that's again, a policy decision.
Yeah, I think your framing is really helpful, Aaron, and that's like also would be one of my goals is to not open up neighbors having a say for things that are not. Yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure. Yeah, none of their business. I'm not sure how to finish that sentence, but I think you know what I mean.
So I think my issue is still with the stabilized and secure, but further development beyond the minimum necessary to repair the existing structure shall require a zoning permit. Is that? Or is repair too fudgy of a word?
I mean, I'll just say that, like, I hear what you're saying.
Yeah.
But until you sort of cross-reference all the other subsections that are referenced by this, it's hard to say which word
Yeah.
makes sense. So I mean, this is part of the deep dive that we'll have to do if we really want to tackle this. I mean, I'm not saying it's a bad idea. I'm just saying
You notice we used the word stabilize and secure twice. We
Yeah.
did not use the word fix. But if we use the word fix, that's a different word.
Right.
And that's got a different definition. We'll have to see where else is fixing being used and have to make sure that it's being used consistently throughout, and that adding a new word may or may not make a difference.
Well, that's
Why don't we flag it as an issue after we, come back to after we look at that other chapter? Because I agree with Maria, like, look, you should be able to put your stuff back the way it is without having to get permission. But again, not knowing what's in that chapter,
Yeah.
Yeah,
we
and you
review that and then come back to it.
Yeah, and you still can do it without a permit. It's just not. It hasn't gotten into all the details here. This is just blanket lease hitting a certain piece of that, which is the securing a structure after damage. But all right, we'll flag that. And again, we'll just see how many of these need to get flagged and looked at, and we can bring them back and try to see what improvements we can make. And again, the last thing I'll say, following up on Aaron's comment, is in different communities, different places, you'll have different flexibility to be able to do different things. If we're writing a set of zoning for Woodbury, we don't need this. It's not a super litigious. We just need some general rules of, hey, where's your setback going to be? You can't put your barn there. You can't put your garage there. It's got to be 10 feet from the property line. It's a little bit more basic sets of rules, and you're writing it for a different audience. Montpelier, everybody's an attorney or is married to an attorney or their neighbor is an attorney. And we really need to make sure that this dots all the i's and crosses all the t's. And so far it has. Every time our regulations have gone to court, the judges who've looked at the various cases have had no complaints about the clarity of our regulations. Nobody has gone in to say, made arguments for what we call void for vagueness and these other things. They just haven't stood up. Our regulations meet those requirements, but we kind of have to, being Montpelier. But that's just, it's one of our burdens for being who we are, is we're kind of forced into doing it. Now, that's not to say we can't do things better and more simply, but we will be scrutinized at a higher level than other communities might be.
Maria, can you tell me like the wording that you are suggesting so that month from now
Well, I am heeding Aaron's call about the shawls and mays.
That doesn't mean you can't have it.
No.
I'm not trying to dissuade you from.
I don't get it, but I think it's just the stabilize and secure is too low of a bar to trigger a zoning permit right here. I think it should just say like minimum necessary to repair the existing structure, which echoes number 1.
Okay,
Just using the
perfect.
same language.
Thank you.
So, sorry, I just have to ask, like, why isn't may legal enough if you're referring to future section? I don't quite get that.
In this case, it probably is okay to say may.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I just until we go through and cross-reference it and really understand what those
Oh,
two
okay.
subsections say, I would be hesitant to do it.
Okay.
And this is just, I mean, I'm spitballing, so take this with a huge grain of salt, but I can see situations where litigants could just run with may. And just sort of, sometimes this is just my personal experience, if you don't put really sufficient guardrails around may, folks will run with it and say, like, I have carte blanche to do whatever I want because it says, I may have to do it, but I don't think I do, so I'm not going to do it, and I'm going to do whatever I want without a permit. And they'll fashion an argument around may and sort of screw it, whereas shall really kind of puts a hard stop and sort of puts a real red light, in terms of going forward without at least investigating whether you need it. And to both of your points, like, I think may probably works here. If the other subsections like bear out, provide an adequate framework to show that there are places where you do and don't need that zoning permit.
Yeah, and we may also want
I
to
don't
be
know.
careful, which we'll review, whether we want to actually reference this sections 1206 and 3004, because by referencing them, what if there's a requirement in that it meets those two, but doesn't meet a requirement somewhere else?
Right.
And then they go and say, yeah, but it said I only have to meet these two here. And it's like, well, no. By trying to help people out and saying, here are the two most likely places to watch out for, we've opened up an avenue for a lawyer to say, yeah, but you didn't mention this. And so my client doesn't have to meet that.
Okay, well, thank you. That
You say
explanation was helpful.
Including but not limited to.
Including but not limited to. Now we've added more words to it and now it's.
Yeah, I know. And I mean, that really, I mean, these really are, I mean, that's the thing is.
That's why we use those words.
You can game this stuff out until there's nothing left to say, you know, and they just, you've got to make decisions at some point, say, I'm comfortable with this and let the chips fall where they may if somebody wants to fight it.
Hmm.
So,
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
And then, so number three, number three. So I assume that changing exterior dimensions requires a permit.
Yes, that would be increasing the size of the building.
Change in use requires a permit.
Yes.
Changing the number of dwelling units requires a permit.
Yes, it can. Usually it does, though.
So I wonder if to make it all simpler, we do the same thing we did in number one, which is to just say that interior renovations, including an increase in floor area, are exempted. Because everything else will be triggered by the other changes in that plan will be triggered somewhere else. It just simplifies that language.
Yep, we could certainly do that. And we could certainly, I can put all these, the next time you see these, we'll put these in red lines and we can certainly go through and decide, I think that's necessary. Let's put that back in. Again, some of these are just to try to help keep people from doing things. You're going to say, oh, you said internal renovations don't need a permit. It's like, well, but your internal renovation was to add 2 more dwelling units to your structure, and that did need a permit. So, I mean, we can make that argument and we would probably win. It's just whether or not we get a lot of people upset when they read the regulations and say, oh, I don't need a permit because of that. As long as I'm doing something inside, I don't need permits.
But that, I mean, I feel like that could be triggered right now because like Aaron was just saying, the including but not limited to language, right?
Mhm.
Because I'm sure you're not ticking every single box that could possibly be ticked here.
Yeah.
You know, but by pulling these 3 things out, you're kind of.
Yeah, we are definitely limiting ourselves. If it's something that doesn't, that triggers something else, but not these 3, then it would still be exempt based on.
But so I think just to make everything simpler. That's what we're trying to do. If that is the goal.
Yep.
I don't think we need everything after floor area. Because there are other things that will also trigger a permit requirement. That aren't listed here.
Okay, and I'll work with Meredith when she gets back from vacation to review her thoughts and concerns. Because we need to have enough clarity as well as we're going through. And maybe we need a qualifier at the top that says, you know, exemption from any one exemption does not necessarily mean full exemption, you know, just we're exempting specific activities.
Okay.
But we could talk about that. So this one is usually any unroofed garden structures, arbors, trellises, pergolas, as long as it's not more than 10 feet in height and conform to setbacks. That's section 3002. So we've got a lot of these little things, electric vehicle supply equipment, car chargers associated with approved parking spaces. So that was a new one that was added in. Basically, people came in and said, hey, if I'm putting in a charger, do I need to permit? This says no, you don't even need a zoning permit. Antennas for use for local business, for dispatch, for police, ambulance service, those don't need permits. Garage sale yard signs, auctions, or similar activities that do not occur on a property for more than 3 consecutive days or for more than 12 days in a calendar year. So you can have garage sales and we're not going to go and hit you up for that. But if you're having a perpetual garage sale, then, and we can adjust these numbers. Different communities have different numbers, how many consecutive days, how many number of days in a calendar year. This is what we've had. It hasn't been an issue. Hunting, trapping in accordance with state regulations. I mean, it really is there's a state, whatever state law, I think that protects that. But at the same time, we want to make sure it's clear that having somebody allowing people to hunt and fish on your property is not a change of use. Unless you're setting up a firing range or a rod and gun club, that's different. This one has come up. All right, so we've talked about that grading and filling. How much, rototilling my garden? At what point? So we put a number at resulting in a movement of not more than 30 cubic yards of material for normal maintenance of roads, driveways, parking areas, yards, or personal or community gardens, and provided appropriate measures are used to prevent stormwater runoff and adversely impact nearby properties, public infrastructure, downstream water bodies. So
I don't want to derail this, but can I have a quick question about that? Where did you get the 30-yard number from? Do you remember?
I don't remember the specifics. I
Okay.
think it's basically a large dump truck is 14 cubic yards.
Yeah.
So it's getting at multiple
Yeah, I was just curious for that number.
loads. So either if you're getting multiple loads of fill or removing multiple loads of fill, but if you're just trucking in a load of topsoil for your community garden and rototilling it in, that doesn't need a zoning permit. Construction or maintenance of a road, sidewalk, bridges, other infrastructure within the road right of way. So this is a big one. So anything within the road right of way does not need zoning permits as long as it's on the city's property. So where this comes up is we talk about things like parklets. They're going to put parklets in front of Positive Pie or the various places. Does that need a zoning permit? The answer is no. It needs a license from the city, but it doesn't need a zoning permit because it is in the road right of way. Items in the road right of way are exempt from zoning. We don't have to. We can regulate them. We choose not to because we own the road, so we've got a lot more control. We can better manage our roadways with licenses than we can with permits. Landscaping and outdoor lighting associated with single and two family parcels. We may, I'll beat Gabe to this one. We're going to be talking later on about the site plan requirements. We actually have already talked about the site plan requirements and expanding the exemption under state law. Single and two family structures are exempt from site plan. And then we have administrative site plans and DRB site plans, major site plans. I think we were making some exemptions because we've gone up to 6. We might landscaping and outdoor lighting associated with, it says single and two. We may just put a marker on there that says maybe we should look at increasing that. But if our new site plan standards are good, so we're addressing it later on to say, hey, if you're an administrative site plan, the rules are easy. It's like, all right, well then, if you're already having to do the site plan, we might as well look at outdoor lighting and landscaping. Because I would think, personally, I would think we might want to look at those for a 4-unit, 5-unit, 6-unit apartment building. We might want to look at landscaping, how it's landscaped between it and its abutting properties. But if it's in an administrative site plan and the regulations are much easier to meet, then because at this point, this is about exemptions. So I'm just going to put increasing question mark to 6. I don't know if it will need it, but we should mark that. The following are not considered subdivisions and therefore do not require zoning permits. Oh, that's right. I was getting ready. I was like, oh, now I'm going to have to go and backtrack. So if you're filing boundary surveys or corrective deeds to repair meets and bounds, that's not going to need a zoning permit. We occasionally get that. Nobody knows where the property line is. We're just going to go and resurvey it and call it what it is. That's not a subdivision. you don't need to get a permit. And merging of two parcels. So if you own two parcels and want to merge them into one, you don't need to ask us permission from a zoning standpoint. You just file those deeds and you're done.
So I have a question about
Yep.
this. It doesn't seem symmetric that someone can take two parcels, turn into one parcel, and there's no oversight of this. But a person can take one parcel and split it into two parcels as long as it satisfies all of the acre requirements of the city. But they do need a permit for that.
Yes, because we have to make sure they actually have. What we look at are those questions of, does it have the right amount of frontage and does it have the right amount of size?
Okay.
If we don't have any zoning requirements, you could literally go out and subdivide and make 150 square foot building lot.
Right.
You might
Except
not be
that we
able
have
to.
requirements.
Yeah, so we have requirements that say you have to meet a certain size. It has to be at least 3,000 or actually 1,500 square feet. No, I think the smallest parcel size is 3,000 square feet. Which is relatively small.
This takes me back to the Dunkin' Donuts situation from last year, where they purchased the parcel next door, turned it into a parking lot. You know, like, did the city become like that much better by having a building demolished and having a formerly useful lot turned into a paved parking lot? You know what I mean? So I don't know that there is no harm done when parcels are merged.
Well, I think the reason we have that requirement is there's nothing. We have no ability to deny a merger. There's no maximum parcel size. If there was a maximum parcel size, then we would have to have that as a permit requirement because we've got to make sure no parcels can be bigger than 1 acre. So therefore, every time you merge a parcel, we have to review it to make sure it meets that requirement. But there are no requirements, so we would just be collecting money for the sake of collecting money.
Right.
But the demolition of the garage that was there and the new site plan and everything, those required permits for those.
And I think we discussed it back in the day. I asked you about it. I was like, wait a second.
Wait,
Yeah.
is this talking about parcels of two different landowners that are adjacent that could be merged? Or is this talking about the same landowner and two adjacent parcels and they can merge their two adjacent parcels?
You'd have to have it under common ownership if you're going to merge them.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, they could be two separately owned. You could own one parcel, I could own the other. We're going to merge them and then be co-owners of a single parcel. And
Okay.
we don't, as an administrative officer, we don't care about that. But
Gotcha.
yeah.
Okay.
So there are statutory exemptions, and we'll talk about those in 1102 and 1103. Sign exemptions are later in the zoning, so we didn't want to put them all up here. We think it's easier if you're working on signs to know what signs are exempt. For example, a sign on the inside of the glass is exempt, so we only regulate signs that are on the outside of a building. Yes, so and we tell people that all the time. Just put stuff on the inside of the glass and you can do a lot because we don't regulate those. Design review exemptions as described in 2201. So there are some design review exemptions that exist as well. Point B is looking at, these are things, so if you're in the designated downtown, if you're in the design review area down here, a permit is not required. Actually, this is the inverse. So if you aren't in the downtown, you also get all these additional exemptions. You don't get these exemptions if you are in the downtown. So except within the design review district, a zoning permit is not required for the following. So if you happen to be outside of that area, you can have an accessory structure that is less than 100 square feet, less than 10 feet in height, 12 feet if it has a pitched roof, as long as it conforms to the setback and lot coverage requirements. So that's always a tricky one that we always if it becomes exempt from zoning, can you still require it to be meeting the conditions? This wording seems to stand up and work. Because once it does not, once it's
Hey, Mike.
built into the setback, then it's not exempt anymore. So yes,
Mike,
Gabe.
So before we go through all these line by line, I mean, I wasn't here. I mean, I was here when we voted on whatever the little pamphlet for design review, like seemed fine. Like, I don't understand the policy why, like a lot of this doesn't really strike me as being very design oriented. It just seems like exclusionary. Like, I don't get why people downtown can't do these, you know, build a little porch or put a little shed in the back of their house. I mean, it just seems kind of silly, but maybe there's a good policy reason. I wasn't here for that conversation, but maybe you could just frame that.
Okay, yeah, so again, all of these are policy decisions that we could certainly go through and extend these exemptions within the design review area as well. The thought has been that if you're in the design review area, that these could impact the design and character of the historic district. So how people design where they put these. And again, it's a policy decision, and maybe the next one makes a little bit more of a, you know, like solar energy devices installed on not projecting more than 10 feet above the sloped roof. You know, right now that's exempt outside, but not inside design review. Maybe we say it's okay. Solar panels on historic buildings are fine. Again, these are all policy decisions. Outside of design review, you can have a swimming pool without a permanent foundation. So if you've got one of those inflatable pools that you can put up and take down every year, doesn't need, as long as it meets the setback, it doesn't need a permit. But if you're in design review, you do. And again,
So the poor people that live downtown can't have like an inflatable kid pool in their backyard?
It's not even just downtown because it goes into like residential, what, 1500? Or I mean, there's a lot. Design reviews are pretty big. Like if you pulled up the map, Mike, it's not a small
Look at
area.
this.
yeah, it's a weird area that doesn't really conform to anything logical. It's kind of,
right.
it is an odd.
Is
it's
the
an
city
odd
plan
line.
the best place to see where the,
You can look
what the
there.
boundary is?
Yeah, there are various spots to look it up. Um,
This is all, I'm with Gabe, this is quite surprising. I didn't realize these, like you can't have an ugly shed, basically, if you live.
well, there's going to be a design review that goes along with it.
Right.
So that's not just to say it's not going to, but
But once you're in design review,
once you're in design review, then certain things
but your
they're going to
neighbors
look
have
at. But
to-
again, we don't have to. And it's not necessarily that there's going to be neighbors that get a review. These could be administrative design review. It just means you're going to need a
Okay.
permit. They might be just administrative. You
So-
can get your swimming pool. We just have to review.
So you can be in design review without having neighbors' ability to weigh in.
There will be
I
a
thought it's the
hearing.
committee that way
Well,
for the,
it used to be everything went to the design review committee, and then everything in the design review committee went to the DRB. And then we shifted that to have a design review committee, and then we adjusted that again to have a whole set that are administrative.
oh,
So the new rules we have, and when we get to design review, we're gonna be like, wow, there's a lot here. That most of that, wow, there's a lot here is because we need to have administrative rules. So we don't have those hearings. We have to be able to go in and say, yep, this meets the design review requirements or it doesn't.
oh.
And the proportion is now like 4-1, like administrative versus going to
Yeah,
the board.
yeah, it used to be 50-50 to the DRB.
Right.
And now we've got it down to 15 permits out of 140.
Oh, so
10%. We're down to 10% that go to the DRB,
Yeah.
but the DRC, there's still a chunk that goes to DRC and not DRB. But
So people on Berry Street, according to the design review overlay district, can't have an inflatable pool.
It's not to say they can't, it just says they don't get an exemption.
I just want to go on
We need to get a
record that
permit
I am
for,
all
like, the
for
kiddie
the
pool.
kiddie
In the
pool.
backyard.
I'm for the kiddie pool, and I just want that to be.
What do you say? What do you say?
Just while we're on the topic, Mike, because I remember when we reviewed the design review district years back. There's some benefit we get, right, from having a design review district. What is that? Like,
Yes, we have to have the design review district in order to have the designated downtown. So if you like
Designated
Montpelier
downtown,
alive, you
okay.
have to have the designated, you have to have the design review. And it also brings in a whole bunch of other requirements when we're looking at tier 1A status and all these other things. We're going in to tell the state, we don't need you guys to do this. We got it. So the more we jettison to say, we're just not going to look at that, the more likely the state is to kind of step in and say, are you really going to take care of this stuff?
Was there, I also remember there was like a minimum, or we had to cover some area. Was it the historic district or something?
That was a big discussion of, did we want to make our design review district and our historic district the same? Did we want to make them,
Wow.
and originally in 2016, the proposal was yes. And residential people in the residential areas like Loomis, Liberty, push back because they said, hey, people in the downtown get tax credits to meet these requirements. We don't get these tax credits. It's not fair to
Yeah.
us.
Yeah, I think
So
I was
that all
remembering
got
something.
edited out and we ended up with a different
I
design
was
review.
remembering a discussion we had where I wanted to make the design review as small as possible, but I can't remember what the parameters were. Anyway, sorry to get
I
off
don't
topic, but-
remember there being, there's no statutory requirement, rule-based requirement that dictates the contours of the design review overlay district. Like
We
we,
just
I think we
remember
can.
There are,
actually talking about this street going up to the college and it did not have, and there was something
Yeah, I'm,
like that was a choice to include,
yeah.
yes, it was a
And-
choice.
but
Yeah.
the other parts sort of weren't a choice
Or
or
no, it is,
or
yeah.
something.
So there is a choice, and again, so if you want to get the benefits of the designated downtown, which
Right,
are
you need
tax
to have a
credit,
design
then
review
you have to
district.
be in the design review district. So if you want to qualify for those benefits, so there are portions of Berry Street, strangely, like Berry Street on the riverside is all in and can qualify for tax credits. If you're on the other side of the street and you're on the uphill
Oh.
side, the cliff side,
Yeah.
you don't qualify for any tax credits. Just
And
because you're
and
not.
that- And if I remember correctly, that was the driver for why we ended up. Cause that was when we had like the big maps and we were.
Yeah, right,
messing around with
right,
markers.
yeah.
Yeah, and that was the idea, was I remember Mike sort of telling us this, is that the designated downtown was sort of the critical component in order to make sure like the overlay district had to include the designated downtown.
Oh, dude, that's
And
what it was.
And that's
what it
really what
was.
we were looking
Okay.
at, but then we were looking up at like the college area, up at the top
Yeah.
of the hill and stuff like that, and that was outside of that.
Yep.
That is outside.
That is
designated, right,
outside,
right,
but
right.
so there are two enabling rules under state law. You have a historic design review and you have a design review. And the question was, did we want to go the historic design review, which kind of says we should be matching it to the historic district, or do we want to just be design review and not historic design review? And that's actually what our Historic Preservation Commission recommended. They said, don't do historic, just do design review. And we can have different rules. It gives us more flexibility and we can choose different areas to apply it to. So now it's a funky shaped parcel, which we can, again, when we get to talking about the maps and districts, we can talk about, do we want to change what's in the design review district? And
Yeah.
right now, National Life is in the design review district. And it's kind of like, I don't know why that's that much different than something else, but it was added in the 1990s. And that's under the assumption, I guess, that if they did any expansions, we would want to have comment on it. But yeah, getting to Gabe's point, if we can like quickly kind of get through what most of these are, we can start to think about, my intention of this was not really to go through and nitpick every word of these and go line by line, but really to kind of give you a sense, but these are actually important. The exemptions are actually important. to give you an idea of how it's set up, so you can start thinking about, what about if we change this? What if we move this, like the swimming pools or the solar energy devices? You know, should solar energy devices also be exempt in the designated downtown? Patios, terraces, decks, or similar unroofed structures to a residential use that are not more than 300 square feet and conform to the setbacks. So again, this I think gets to the fact that if you've got a historic building in design review and you want to add patios and decks, we can't exempt them and then say we want to look at them. So I think that kind of has to stay there, although the unattached things we could certainly exempt, but things that are attached to the building, if we're in design review and we're looking at design, if you're going to put a porch on your house, it should be under that design review if we're going to have design review. Entries and landing up to 25 square feet and any associated handicap ramp or stairs provided they are uncovered. So if somebody happens to be wanting to come in for a permit to put in a handicap ramp, that is exempt from zoning. And including going up to 25 square feet, that's a 5x5. That's enough room that you need to get to a flat area where you can open a door. If you've ever been in an old house where the stairs go up, you got to open the door and figure out how not to fall down the stairs. Should have a 5x5 landing outside of any door. Bulkheads that conform to setbacks, again, they're exempt outside of design. They need a permit inside. Dormers, again, dormers affect the exterior of a building. We're in design review. Television antennas, radio, satellite dishes, similar provided on-site communication to meet standards below. So certain ones are exempt. This has become less necessary, and we may consider this, reviewing this. Again, as these were written originally, we used to have satellite dishes for our televisions that were just, you know, and the thought was you can't just plunk that on the front of a historic house. We'll let you put them on the sides, we'll let them put them on the back. But each of these keep getting smaller and smaller and smaller until now they're just like whip antennas. And at a certain point, we might be able to say they're exempt everywhere, but we need to have that conversation. The next page are the agricultural exemptions and the utility exemptions. These are statutory. So this just really is restating. We could, if we're talking about making things smaller, go through and just restate state law. Just reference state law. And we could do quite a bit of that, and it shortens things, but it's not very informative to the public. That's the trade-off. So we can say agriculture that meets 4.4.1.2 subsection 3 is exempt from zoning. It's not really helpful unless you know what that entails, but it does shorten the document by going through and inserting those exemptions and just leaving it unspoken. 120 talks about vested rights. This is better known as grandfathering. So, you know, if you've got prior permits, the fact that we change zoning does not change your permit. Your permit's still good. If you apply for a permit and then the zoning changes, as long as you've applied for the permit before the zoning went into effect, your permit is evaluated based on the application date. Non-conformities. This is basically anything that's pre-existing non-conforming. You know, my house doesn't meet the front setback for my district. My house was built in 1823, so it can stay there until such time as it's moved or demolished or something else. And that's under state law. There are certain rules under state law. A lot of these help to clarify non-conforming parcels. How do we handle non-conforming parcels? Can you develop a 1,500 square foot parcel? Well, that depends. If it's on water and sewer, you can. If it's not on water and sewer, then it has to meet a certain size. So we just have to have enough rules to understand, all right, how do we interpret it? And what state law says is you need to meet certain requirements, you know, but the regulations have to lay out the details. So the shall not increase the degree of nonconformity, or the degree of nonconformity is not increased, is one of those legally beegly terms that we have to make sure we've got the answers to those questions. And there are a lot of case law that gets into it, but that's really what we're looking at is you've got a non-conforming structure and you want to fix it. So my house has a porch on the front. It's non-conforming. Can I repair that porch? Yes, I can. Under these rules, I can. In other places, it might say no. What if I want to put a deck on the side? Could I put a deck on the side of the house if I've got a non-conforming structure? Yes, as long as the deck itself is conforming. So we've got all these little caveats of like, all right, how do we handle this? And that's what, there's a famous case that goes into it, does a non-conforming structure mean you can, can you change the use of a non-conforming structure? And there's case law that says, well, yes, you can, but it really comes down to making sure the town has rules. And we look at each one independently. A non-conforming structure, we've got rules that say what you can and can't do. I can't make that porch longer. So I couldn't extend my porch that's non-conforming to go to the driveway, because that would be making a bigger non-conforming structure. Or maybe it can, as long as it doesn't get closer to the road. So as long as, and those are the types of things that the courts want us to make sure we have in here. And those are the things Meredith wants to know when I get an application. Can I just look at this and say, all right, it's non-conforming, but it meets these requirements. It can be repaired. It may be altered, enlarged, or expanded, provided the degree of nonconformity is not increased. These are our rules for nonconforming structure. It shall not be moved unless it's brought into compliance. So if you have a nonconforming shed that is 2 feet from the property line and the setback is 10, you want to move it to 8. No, if you're going to move the shed, you got to move it all the way to 10. You can't just make it better. If you're going to pick it up and move it, you got to make it compliant. And again, policy, we can change that. The phrase does not increase that the degree of nonconformity is not increased means that there will be no horizontal, vertical, or volumetric increase to the portions or features of a structure that are nonconforming. So again, this all goes into all the possible scenarios you could have. I have my porch. It's 5 feet from the property line and I need to be 10 feet. What if I put a second story on it? Can I do that? Still only 5 feet away. The way this is written, no, I can't, because I'm making it volumetrically bigger and more non-conforming. Other communities may have different rules that say, yeah, as long as you're not getting closer to the road, you can make it bigger. But that's not the way our rules are written. But we have to have some rules that say how we handle it. And these are the rules that we have. And we have those same type of rules for non-conforming uses. It's complicated. It doesn't come up a lot. And I say that because when we rewrote the zoning in 2018, we made most of the buildings in the city compliant. Before 2018, there were places in, I think, medium density residential, which was the old zoning designation, had like 60% non-conforming structures because the setbacks had no bearing on reality. So everybody was non-conforming. So these rules were really critical. And under the old zoning, if you had a non-conforming structure and you were doing things, you had to go to public hearings. And then your neighbors would get notified. And that was where the old thing where neighbors really had a say in everything that you did because everybody had non-conforming structures. So long-winded way of saying these are very important rules, but we've tried to make them come up very infrequently. But they still come up. We still have some, my house and others, that for whatever reason don't meet the setbacks or height requirements, or the use is something that isn't allowed in that district anymore. 1204 talks about abandonment. At what point is something abandoned? Is a use abandoned? I think this one says it's a year. We could make that period longer. incomplete development. What happens if somebody starts a project and just walks away with it half finished? We've got rules that say this is how we handle it. Damaged or destroyed. Within 6 months of damaged or destroyed by cause, the owner shall either stabilize the structure. So this has some requirements for what they have to do. We can grant extensions, especially if there's factors beyond the owner's control. This happened a little bit with the fire. Because there were insurance issues, they couldn't move on until the insurance issues were resolved. So, but if a structure is damaged or destroyed, the structure may be rebuilt and used as provided before provided the degree of nonconformity is not increased, and the applicant receives a zoning permit for construction within 12 months of the structure being damaged or destroyed. So, my house, somebody drives a car into my porch that's non-complying, that is fine. Under the non-conformity rules, I can rebuild it as it is in the same spot, but I need a permit. And then the last two sections, section 130, I won't go through the details of all this. This is the reasonable accommodations for accessibility. So if for whatever reason somebody has fair housing, ADA, any number of reasons you want to make a claim, we have a process. We needed this because we did have an application that came in where we had to address this. We didn't have a process. Meredith's like, I just don't know what would I do with this application. So we now have a process that sets up as like, give us something in writing, says what you need in order for us to meet your accommodation. We have some standards. If I can't do it as an administrator, it gets kicked to the DRB and they would make the decision. So that's what this is tackling. The miscellaneous provisions tries to address my concerns I have on information points. I think they should be removed. Illustrations are intended to provide guidance where there's a conflict between the illustrations and the descriptive text. The text overrules it. And then calculating time, and that's just out of state law. So these are, again, these are just setting the stage for the zoning and how it gets handled. But the big pieces for you guys to consider are really the applicability and the exemptions are probably the two biggest sections of, you know, let's look at what we've heard. Are there things that could be exempted without harming our policy goals and our plan? And in some cases, what I think is it's less trying to get projects out of needing zoning permits. I would be thinking we've got more work to do later in the document about making sure those rules are not burdensome to apply for, not burdensome to meet, but meet our objectives. We've got policy goals. We want to meet environmental goals. We want to meet good design and character, but can we do it in a better way than we're doing right now?
Can I just ask
Yes.
a question about appeals? So I know we talked about this before, but I've forgotten. Can any decision be appealed, administrative and DRB, or? Yes.
Yes. So administrative permits get appealed to the DRB.
Oh, okay.
DRB decisions get appealed to environmental court.
Okay.
And it's just
And
the amount of.
they're not on the record appeal.
They're not on the record appeals. We reviewed that, had a long discussion. So for when there are two different types of appeals that go to court, on the record and de novo. So on the record means we take our zoning and make it really legally. And we have an attorney who's our zoning administrator. We absolutely could do that. And we had discussed it a long time because we had been getting a lot of appeals that went to court. Our hope was that we would, if we did this, we could avoid appeals to the environmental court, or it's not the environmental court anymore, but I'll keep saying environmental court. But what we heard when we talked to other communities like Stowe is it actually doesn't stop people from appealing, which was our goal. Hey, if we did it on the record, people will stop appealing this to court. And they said, nope. Because the difference between on the record and de novo is. In de novo, you appeal my permit, you go to court, the judge doesn't care what the decision was before. He or she will look at the facts and look at it as a new de novo, as new. They'll of course look at the information that was provided, but for the most part, they're taking a new look at it. And on the record review is going to say, you guys have done everything. You're following very strict rules of evidence. You're taking evidence and swearing people in. Well, we swear people in, but there's a much more detailed process of having those hearings. And so we've done that. We've written a decision. In that case, the judge will review it on the record for the merits. A lot of times when people appeal, they're just appealing it to slow it down and delay it and
Right. How
cost
many,
people money. And so what happens in Stowe when we talk to them is they just appeal it on the record parts. They'll just go through and say, well, you didn't follow this procedure in this, under this requirement under the appellate rules of procedure, you're supposed to do this and you didn't. We're going to appeal it. And it may be completely bogus, but from their standpoint, they're delaying this project. It may take 2 years to go to trial. And in all that time, somebody's losing money and have mortgages and loans, and maybe they kill the project. And many times that works. That's basically what happened.
and the right to appeal is enshrined in state law. Is that
Enshrined in state
correct?
law.
Okay?
That's what we've been arguing with the state to try to tighten up those loopholes over who can and can't. Just like there's a new rule that says you're exempt, there's like an exemption. It's like, if you get a determination from the Environmental Commission that you meet this requirement, then you're exempt from Act 250. And so an affordable housing project gets proposed and they're like, I'm exempt from Act 250. The people who opposed the project appealed that determination that says, I don't need to go to court, and they end up in court anyways for 2 years over the determination that says you don't need to get a permit.
Yeah. I mean, the reason obviously this.
So that's what people just want to make this go away. Just
Yeah.
make them stop being able to do this. Is there a valid, if you've got a valid claim, prove your valid claim front. And that way we can, because we want people to have rights, but a lot of these are abuse. Just,
Yeah.
I don't have a case, but I'm going to wear these guys out and run them out of money. And and that was pretty much the case with our parking garage and hotel. The
Yeah.
judge was looking at everything and saying that the cities just line up right. You guys are fine. But
Yeah.
then COVID hits and the Besheras and their funders, because they were working with Hilton at the time, I believe, and Hilton was like, we can't keep throwing money at an appeal. Even if we're going to win, we can't. We're the hotel industry is getting hit by COVID. We can't afford to keep putting money into this, so it falls through, which is sad. But that's what happens with appeals. If I just keep delaying it, maybe I can stop it.
And right, this is on my mind because I heard that the Heaton Street subdivision, which is right by my house, was appealed. But there's nothing we could have done, I guess, in our zoning other than not require a subdivision to. Well, even if it had been an administrative permit, I guess they could have appealed
Could
it.
have appealed it.
Yeah,
Um,
unless we
the
required a
best
subdivision
thing-
to not have a permit.
The best thing we can do is to make sure we have good zoning regulations, so when it goes to court, the environmental
but it
court
doesn't-
isn't
as-
throwing it back to
yes.
go through and say,
That's
this
important, but as
this
you
housing
said,
project is
Yeah.
thrown, the housing project is now, the permit is now void because the zoning regulations aren't sufficient enough, and therefore I'm siding with the neighbors. We've never haven't had that happen.
Yeah.
Attorneys and judges have always said the same thing. The regulations are good. This is just
right, but
neighborly
as you said, the most important thing sometimes to a developer is the time and
Yeah.
money. So
And the
that's
best we can
bad
do,
thing.
yeah, the best we can do is to make sure we've got good regulations so judges aren't, and attorneys, when I see, and I'm not commenting at all on this project up there. I haven't seen the appeal. I haven't been paying attention, but for the other projects that I've looked at that were appealed, when I look at an appeal and I look at it and say, you know, they're, if they could find things to pick at on our regulations, they would be. And the fact that in some of these other cases, we've had a handful of cases that went to court. These were ones that were not about whether our regulations were void for vagueness or were unconstitutional or overreaching. Those were all fine. So if we're not doing a good job, you can be assured that we would have attorneys pointing out all the flaws in our zoning to say these are bad zoning regulations and need to be, these permits need to be voided because they're just not good. They're not based on sound legal basis. But we don't hear that. So that's good. So that's something for us just to keep in mind as we go through this. It does seem legally, it does seem long. Sometimes it's because we have to be that way. But that doesn't mean we can't do better. That doesn't mean we can't be more efficient and make it cleaner and make it easier for people to understand. But yeah, we can't do anything about appeals.
Okay. Thanks for reviewing that. I still get confused, but
So I would like to go back to the design review overlay district exemptions. And
Where are you?
I'm back at 1101 E. None of these things seem that terrible to me. And I don't understand why they aren't just general exemptions. Why are they only exemptions if you're not in a design review overlay district? I mean, I think the solar energy one I think that could definitely be moved to just exemptions. Because I think we're trying to promote, and our city plan says that we are trying to promote alternative energy sources.
Well, I think what we can do is we can circle the ones that we think, and we can have the design review and the Historic Preservation Commission come in and give us some input. How much of an issue how much of an issue is it if people put solar panels on a historic roof? And maybe they're going to say, at this point, it's not a big deal. Or maybe it's like, oh no, if it's being screwed into, this type of roofing, we really need to evaluate how it gets attached. We don't really care that there are solar panels there. We want to regulate how it gets attached to the structure so it doesn't damage the historic integrity.
But that's unrelated to their design review overlay district. That has to do with the historic quality of the house. Those are two different things. Well, there's like a Venn diagram, right? And there's like the subset that is involved in both. Like my house is not part of the overlay district. So, but it's also a historic house.
Yep.
But for some reason, I can do whatever I want with my solar. I can't actually get solar because my roof is too pitched. They've already informed the solar companies have told me I can't install it because the roof line just won't accept it. But I don't see why, if the concern is historic structures, then, but this has to do with the design review overlay district, which is not historic structures.
It is historic structure. So within the design review overlay district, we group things into two pieces. We've got historic buildings and they have their requirements, and we have non-historic buildings and they have their requirements. So if you're going to impact a historic building within design review, then you have to maintain the historic integrity of the building, and there are certain requirements, and we'll go through that when we get there. If you're not a historic building, then there's still design review requirements that you need to meet. So that way, as new buildings are built in our downtown, maybe a historic building gets torn down because it's too damaged from a flood or something and it gets replaced. If it's in design review, we want to make sure and like I said, I'm going to have Meredith here for this because she's the one who works with it, and it's been a long time since I've dealt with it. But they look at how you don't want to have a fake historic building. You want to have a building that is representative of its time. So if you're going to build a new building, we want it to not be a make pretend historic building. We want it to make sure it looks reasonably modern, and but at the same time, it can't, they've got things for how they keep it from clashing with the historic buildings around it. And that's fine. That's what You know, that's why we have a design review district. That's why they look at this. That's why we've got historic and design people that work on it. And for the most part, my understanding from people who've gone through the design review process is it sounds scary, but at the end of the day, it's generally a positive experience working through those. But as you're talking about these things here,
These things all seem very minor to me.
you know, they sometimes are concerned, like with signs. They don't really care about the signs. What they care about is how are you going to attach that sign to your building? And I want to know, because you've got a brick building. If you've got a brick building, I want to make sure that these are drilled into the mortar and not into the brick. And I want to make sure that the structure that it's hanging from is X, Y, and Z, because we want to, you know, and that's what they look at in the design review are those types of things when they're looking at a sign, because they look at signs, they look at these other things, but in other cases, we've got signs that are like, well, if it's a sign in the sign ban, that's administrative. So it doesn't have to go to the DRB because there's already a thing to attach it to. So if it already has lights, that's fine. If you want to add new lights, you might have to go to design review because we're going to make sure that those lights are historic or not historic or meeting so some of these, like I said, I think with the solar energy devices, my guess is they don't really care about the solar energy device. It's about how it attaches to the historic building. But I think we need them to come here and educate us and talk to us, because they might go through and say nowadays might be like, yeah, that actually doesn't matter to us as much.
Mike, do you have data that bears out sort of? I don't want to put words in your mouth, but it seems to me like what you're concerned is that like by making this non-exempt when you're in the design review or overlay district, like it is somehow there's an assumption that it's like prohibited conduct or that it's somehow. I mean, I guess my question is, do we have data that bears out like folks in the design review overlay district that have to apply for zoning permits for these types of accessories and dwellings or whatever this exemption list is that excludes the overlay district, like how many times do they get denied the ability to do it? How often is the kiddie pool denied? I mean, do we have data that
I don't even know if we've gotten any kiddie pool.
Well, that's not, I mean,
But
that's
yes,
right.
yeah, no,
I mean,
the answer is
that-
we very, very rarely deny permits.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the
Very,
question is
very
like, is there a set of, do we have data that would point us to specific types of activities that maybe we do see a tendency to say, we don't want that in the district. Whereas these other types of activities that are contemplated in this exemption list, we just greenlight it all the time. I mean, we can make an informed decision about really if there's an appropriateness in terms of like subjecting, these types of exemptions reviews within the design overlay review district. But if like we're getting, we have a pool of data that suggests we've got like 30 we've had 30 folks that have wanted to put in a solar energy device within the overlay district, and those all get greenlit. And there's not a lot of haggling over it. We can take a critical look to say, like, does this make sense to have it in this category?
I feel like you could argue it both ways.
Hmm?
I feel like you could argue, so, I mean, I feel like the kiddie pool requirement is the most absurd of these, and so
Right.
I keep coming back to it. But one, just because no one would ever think to look up the zoning regulation to see if they could put a kiddie pool in their front yard, doesn't mean that it hasn't been an issue. It just means that it is so preposterous that no one would think to look it up in the first place. And so therefore, it should be automatically exempt, because everyone kind of can agree, like, wait,
But it's-
what? So
but
what,
it's
kiddie
also-
pools are regulated, you know?
But bear in mind that like kiddie pool is one end of the spectrum of the
Oh, I know.
exemption. Like there is the above ground,
Right,
I mean, there's
but I think the fact that they have been approved every time they've come forward is not itself indicative that it's okay to leave them as a permitted thing. But to me, that means that it should be exempted if they.
no,
approve it every
I'm
time.
suggesting the opposite, which
Oh,
is
okay, I thought you
if
were
we
the
have
other
a
side.
set of data that gives us the indication that, when the review happens, there's no hiccups along the way.
Okay.
Generally, like the review process has borne out that this is an acceptable practice even within the design review district.
So therefore. it should be-
Why have this
Okay.
enumerated here? We can take it out.
Yeah,
I just don't know if we
yeah,
have
we're gonna
that
end
gap.
up with, we're eventually gonna end up with, for any of these uses structures, we're gonna end up with 4 buckets. One bucket is you can't do it. Another bucket is it's allowed, but you need to get a hearing. The next bucket is you need to get a permit. The next bucket is this is so minimal, so de minimis, as we say, it doesn't even need a permit. You know, dog houses and bird houses don't need permits, right? They're de minimis. So we sometimes need to talk about the swimming pool. Is there a point at which a swimming pool should need a permit, or should all of them just be exempt? You know, if somebody's putting in a 6-foot swimming pool and people are like, well, shouldn't they have a fence around it? It's exempt.
I think. I mean, legally, you need to have a fence around it, like.
Legally what? Legally who?
Like in tort law.
Yeah, oh yeah, after my kid dies in your pool, I can sue you.
But
But
I think.
that
I mean,
there's no
I don't think
requirement. The
would
insurance
require it.
may require it, but if your insurance company doesn't, or you don't have insurance,
But then
there's
this goes
no
into-
requirement to protect the public safety. That's where once you exempt something,
Yeah.
we have no way of introducing something that says it does. Now, there may be rules with building code that say you need to have a fence. I don't know building code. That would be a question for them, but it's just one of the exemptions of at what
Right.
point do we draw a line that says these are exempt, those aren't? And we're looking at a broader public input of, okay, you know, can anybody just put anything? And maybe the answer is that's perfectly fine because under building code, it's protected, and therefore, even though it's in the design review district, having a swimming pool in your front yard is fine.
Sure, and my question is just this, is that, I mean, again, I think with all these things, we can circle the drain around, there's a lot of interest, I mean, there's a lot of ways to parse it, and that's fine. But it would help, at least for me, and I don't know for the rest of the group, like, to have a set of data to the extent that it exists, like, if you can tell us, like, what are the things that are going in those 4 buckets that you just
Yeah.
described to us over the last 5 years or something, that would help inform us looking at this going forward.
Yeah.
I don't know if that data exists, that's all I'm asking.
Yeah, we'll have Meredith come in. She's on vacation, but
Yeah.
we'll have her come in and try to be a part of as many of these as possible because she's got a wealth of this information. We did some of this analysis when we were talking about our interim changes. How can we get these? What are the things? So we looked at what are all the DRB hearings that we've had for 7 years. We've had the zoning. How often have major site plans come up? Very infrequently. But it came up as a big complaint from a lot of the builders that major site plan is a big barrier. We didn't get very many things. So I mean, looking at the statistics, it would say, well, not much, but it was certainly perceived as a big barrier. The subdivision, absolutely. That was like almost half the permits that go to the DRB are either sketch plan or final subdivisions. And it was just like, subdivision. It was amazing how many times that came up. We could vastly reduce that by making 1 and 2 lot subdivisions administrative and eliminating sketch plan as a requirement.
Mhm. And
And that's what we did in our intro rule. So now we're going to get into some of these other questions of, okay, if we've got, think about those 4 buckets. Once you take something out of that bucket that says it's exempt, it loses, it loses our ability to put a finger on it to say that's out of bounds. We also could go through and say, what's the worst case scenario? We can always go back and amend the zoning at a later date to go through and say, we took this out and it's being abused. We could put the rule back in.
Yeah. I mean, I think what's unique about this is, I mean, to your pool example, I mean, the exemption says like, if I'm outside the overlay district, I can put that pool in and assume all the downside risks that are attendant to that. But if you're in it, you've got to get this extra layer of review. I mean, I'm just like suggesting that maybe Meredith has, because she has a wealth of information well beyond any of us that we have, like, if maybe there's some low hanging fruit in terms of making the decision, like this belongs in this exemption list, this doesn't belong in the exemption list. If there's clear cut cases, like that's going to be helpful to that. We can get into those nitty gritty details with the ones that are in the gray area, but
yeah, and then the policy can come in. We'll get design review and historic preservation to come in, because that's really point B, is really getting into those. If we exempt it, then they don't get a say at it. And again, they're making a recommendation. They don't get the vote. They're
Yeah.
here to give us information to go through and say, our concern about this is the fact that we are interested in X.
Yeah.
And maybe they're like, I don't even know why swimming pools are in here. We really don't care because it's not affecting the historic character, or as long as it's not in the front yard, it's not going to affect, and maybe the exemption is swimming pools not in the front yard.
And that's, I mean, and that's the thing, it's just, right now, we're just kind of operating on vibes.
Yeah.
And I think that to the extent that we do have data from the last 7 years with this latest iteration of the regs, like,
Yep.
it'll help kind of.
Yeah, and she'll be back.
Focus
She'll be
our-
back, and a little bit of this was not really meant for us to hash all this stuff
Yeah,
out today.
right.
It was really just meant to, hey, let's get you an understanding of what part one is. And part one is your biggest umbrella. What needs a permit, what doesn't need a permit, and then all the legal mumbo jumbo that goes along with meeting severability and applicability and all of these legal requirements that we have to make in case somebody wants to take it to court and challenge its validity. Is this even a valid set of zoning regulations? Yes, we've got it all those boxes are checked because it's all in part one. And then the big picture of what needs a permit. And then after we've got it, when I teach zoning administrators, it's always like it falls into the first bucket. If it doesn't fall into the first bucket, doesn't matter what we say for parts 2, 3, and 4. If it doesn't hit the first bucket, doesn't hit this, then the rest of it doesn't matter. You can't go through and say, yeah, but what about the stormwater impacts of it's exempt? So it has to hit the first bucket to hit the later ones, and then we'll get to the later ones. And maybe down the line, we're like, in this case, it's approved. It's an administrative permit, and we make as many things administrative as we can moving forward. So,
Okay. I just took a quick look at the July 14th minutes. I don't want to cut off any conversation. I don't know. There's a couple things that are blank. I don't know whether it's important to have those filled out, but I noticed that.
yeah, I might have to go through and check those. We might have
Okay.
to
Okay, so
Let's-
maybe
let's
we'll
table these till
Okay.
I didn't take a
That
look
sounds
at them. Let me check also in attendance. I can't believe we wouldn't have other also in attendance people, so
Well, yeah, under general business, it says that Stephen Whitaker mentioned yada, 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 so
Yep.
definitely propose to include him as somebody also in attendance.
yeah. And I think I've got notes on approve the agenda and those, but let me get
Okay.
those and then we'll approve this at the next meeting.
No one has anything else, but open to other comments. We can entertain a motion to adjourn.
Do we know what we're gonna look at for next time?
I think we'll have a follow-up. We'll have Meredith here to have a follow-up on part one. Now that you guys have an understanding of
Okay,
it, I think
okay.
that would be the next plan.
Okay, thank you. I move to adjourn.
I'll second.
All those in favor?
All
I
Aye.
Thanks, everyone.
right, thank you.